it's been a good week on and off the field. I think one of the positives in having a game weekend to weekend is that there's a little bit more time to analyse what has gone on before and then try and practically put some of those things back into place or into some sort of order again. Guys have, I think, taken on board an awful lot of information and maybe a lot of reflection from last weekend. And listen, we train well. The guys train well every week. I don't think I've ever come on here and said we've had a poor week and the players have not applied themselves, because that's never been the case. I do think that some of the work that we've been able to achieve over the last couple of weeks will hopefully see some bear some fruit, as they say, as we move down the line.
Thank you, Coach. We'll start with Drake Hills from the Tennessean, then go to Tim Sullivan. Go ahead, Drake.
Thanks, Matt. Gary, it's pretty interesting at this part in the season, considering that the opponents that you guys are going to be facing over the next month or so, teams that are either level on points with you guys or obviously some of the West's best. Given where you guys are at, how does that impact maybe the stress levels or maybe even the internal pressure on how you guys are wanting to go about your business? And has there been any experience of burnout during this time because of the weight of what you guys have been going through?
Yeah, I think the only burnout is me. I don't think there's any burnout anywhere else. I think the guys are in a really good place. I don't think that's the issue one little bit. Yes, this time of year is stressful. I think, honestly, we all put ourselves under pressure. Every professional athlete and coach puts themselves under pressure to be winning every weekend. And when you don't, then you feel that. You know, there is some stress attached to it. There's some anguish. We're in a scrap, and a big scrap, with a lot of other teams. And I said to the guys at the start of the week, you know, there's some good and bad in that. The negative is that we found ourselves in a scrap from a reasonable position. But I guess the encouraging part of that is, I'm not sure I'd want to be in a scrap with any other team than this one. They know how to do that. They know what it's all about. We've already proved in many games before that we're capable of earning points when teams least expect us to. Are there some things we have to improve? Absolutely. And, you know, that's been a big part of the focus, not just this week, but as we're transitioning from a back five team into a back four team with the hope of being far more creative. Some of the stats have borne that out in the last two games, but the points tally hasn't. So we have to improve that. There's certain statistics we've improved dramatically, but that's not one of them.
Next, we'll go to Tim Sullivan and then Ben Wright. Go ahead, Tim.
Hey, Gary, you guys got Anibal back for a little run out on Sunday. What did you think of his first performance back after a long layoff? And then the other side of the injury situation, is there an update on Ake?
So, yeah, delighted Anibal was back in the group. You know, he's had a couple of quad injuries this year that have kept him out of the group, of the 20-man group, and the starting 11, more importantly, for far too long. He's been a player that the more and more I look at some of the footage and the way that, you know, I'm breaking down the things that we can improve on and we can take a positive step with, he's been a big loss. You know, likewise Teal. You know, Teal's been out of action for the best part of 3 months, 14 weeks prior to... you know, his terrific turn of form. And now we're going to see him lost again for a short period of time at one of the most inopportune times with the type of form he's in. Those guys are difficult to replace. So it's lovely to have Anibal back, and he's in a really good place now. I'd love to think that he's going to be influential in this running. Ake's still out of action. He's been doing some much more stimulating physical work to try and put the area in question under some pressure. So I think we're moving ever closer to having him back in the group, but I would still think it will be at least a week or 10 days until we see him having gone through all the tests he needs to.
Next, we'll go to Ben Wright, and we'll go back to follow-ups with Drake and Tim. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, Gary, back during the transfer window, you had talked about not wanting to add players just to kind of make up numbers, but wanted guys who would come in and really do a job for the team. How does Jacob Schaffelberg fit into that, and what have you seen from him so far, and what are you kind of expecting to see from him down this stretch?
Well, Jacob, I mean, I think most people would agree with me in saying he's a very, very bright talent. You know, we've suffered at his hands last season when we got beat up there 2-1. I think it was 2-1, it might have been 2-0. And his dynamic nature, I think, gives the group a dimension that we haven't had, that vertical movement, that genuine pace that will, you know, cause problems without any other quality or commodity in the game. We haven't seen a lot of him this week. He was in the session today, and it was very nice to see him working. We're going to have to work through one or two, you know, I think areas of transition for him in his world outside the club and obviously on the field with the group. But I see him playing a really big part in this running. Will it be Saturday? That is yet to be seen, just purely because of the circumstances this week.
We'll go back to Drake Hills and then Tim Sullivan. Go ahead, guys.
Hey, Gary, just want to clarify what you mentioned about Teal, that he's expected to be out for a longer period of time. Are you expecting a week, 2 weeks? And then secondly, you know, given the defense of how you guys have been playing, first you go up against Toronto and their group, maybe about 15, 14 goals combined with Osorio and Jimenez. And then, of course, going up against this group with the two guys in Dallas, Areola and Ferreira, how do you go about going up against that group?
Well, I mean, to your point about the Toronto group, I think most people felt coming into the game they were possibly the most improved team with the quality that they added in the transfer window, and that has been borne out. I thought we made a very good fist of it, but they have proven to be incredibly effective, that front line, and I've no doubt will continue to be. Ferreira, as you know, is suspended, having got booked the other night. But even so, I think I've said multiple times, Areola's, for me, one of the best wide players, if not the best wide player in the league. I like him enormously. He's a two-way player. He's a genuine individual, but has got fantastic quality and energy. And then you've got, you know, the young boy on the left-hand side, Velasco. My pronunciation's never great, so I apologise for anyone I might be listening to this. Really, really bright young talent. We saw him come into the game early on in the season and score against us, and I think he's gone from strength to strength from that game, and has really, as you rightly say, been part of one of the most productive front lines in the league. I think they're backed up by a very dynamic midfield. The addition of, again, forgive my pronunciation, Leger, and, you know, the other young, talented players, Pomacao in midfield if he plays. I think they've got a really good, young, dynamic group that have overwhelmed teams at times. You know, they've made life very, very difficult. I think they've found a way to be tougher to play against as well, which of course is a good balance for any team. And it will be an incredibly difficult game. But if you look across the last two that we've had at home, although we've not been able to add a point to the board, which is never, ever good news, we've certainly from a productive standpoint been far more creative, had far more efforts at goal, and controlled far longer periods than we've done for a long, long time, and against two very good teams. So there's an awful lot to be taken out of that. There's some things that we need to improve and some edges that need to be smoothed out. But I think we're moving in a very positive direction with what would effectively be a new look group.
Next, we go to Tim Sullivan and Ben Wright. Go ahead, boys.
Jerry, you mentioned that game that Schaffelberg scored against you guys last year. It was 2-1. You got it right the first time.
Thank you.
But,
I second guess myself now. It's old age.
you mentioned earlier the shift from the back five to the back four. What was kind of behind that philosophy? Was it just getting one more body in that front two lines there, or what kind of is behind it? And then what are you hoping to see out of it in this stretch run of the season?
Well, a couple of things really. I always felt as though it was a shape to move towards, especially with a glut of home games coming up. And to your point, to try and get another attacking player fundamentally on the field rather than that extra defender. I also think we'd become maybe a tad predictable in the things that we were doing in that shape, and teams had worked us out, as good teams do, and we weren't getting quite as much out of it, especially at home, as we have done before. What I would say is, in any evolution, you see some areas and some fault lines that need to be addressed. And we're no different. In adding Shaq to the group, we've found a new and bright attacking dimension to the team. But that's also created one or two flaws in the way that we repress or we defend on counter-attacks. And I think we've, fallen foul of that. So there are definitely some areas of our game that we're slowly but surely coming to grips with. The assessment of the weekend's game was probably clearer for me than any game that we've had so far. And I'd like to think I articulated some of those points to the team pretty clearly that we've been able to work on throughout this week and will continue to. But, some of the other things that go through your mind as well when things are not necessarily going according to plan. We've overcome an awful lot in our first 2.5 years. And I don't need to go over some of the problems that we've run into, most notably, of course, in this present season, will be the 8 games away from home to begin with and a change of conference. And we've overcome just about every challenge that's been put in front of us. The one thing now that we have to try and put right, correct, is our own form. And at the start of all of this, certainly at the start of this year, who would ever have imagined that, having not been beaten at home throughout all of last season? So it's amazing the things that this game throws up. The brand new stadium, whilst incredibly attractive and great to play in, is proven to be a little bit more difficult to win games in than we first thought. I've no doubt that will come good, and we'll do our very utmost to make it right this weekend.
Thank you, Coach. We'll wrap it up with Ben Wright and Bob Cusack. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, Gary, this is kind of similar to some of the tactics questions. In this stretch that you guys have switched to a back four, you've been creating plenty of chances, and it seemed like, other than Hani, the issue has been finishing them. Dax kind of said as much, that no one else outside of Hani is stepping up. Do you feel like it's kind of a domino effect type thing, that once the first one goes in, that'll kind of spur a change? And if so, how do you as the manager kind of keep the players confident when they're getting chances and not finishing them?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Look, I know I've mentioned this a couple of times, and it'll be an old adage. As long as you're creating, I think that in itself keeps the group enthused and confident and purposeful. When you stop creating, then you've got an even bigger problem, because you're now not even getting to that point where you're asking players to execute and keeping their personality buoyant. So to that degree, I think we're in a good place. In terms of putting it right, the only thing you can ever work on is obviously the opportunities that come along, and put players in those positions in training, make it as realistic as possible. But there have been some very good moments, as you've rightly mentioned. I do think as well, once the first one goes in, but probably more importantly than that, Ben, the next win at home, the sooner that comes, the better it'll be for the group. And I think a lot of those old emotions come flooding back again then. You know, at the moment we're going through that period where you get used to what you get used to. I know it sounds strange, but we're used to drawing a game or losing a game, and you don't want to be in that world. You know, that spirals out of control. We also got used to winning games and doing well at home and not getting beat. So I think it's not that far away that a victory would put everyone back into a really positive mindset and get everyone thinking again about the playoffs and what that looks like and where we can finish. But until you get that victory, and quite honestly, in fact, I would take the worst performance of the year and a win. Because we've played well to a large degree the last 2 games and lost. So somewhere along the way, you got to win, and I think the rest of it starts to take some sort of a natural course.
Thank you, Coach. We'll wrap up your session today with Bob Cusack here on the floor. Go ahead, Bob.
How much does it help that you're at home and they're trying to get out of the scrap? Does that help a lot?
Oh, an awful lot. I know there'll be certain folks that will say that it must be more difficult and the pressure mounts when you're at home. But I've got to tell you, it's not easy on the road. There's a lot of good teams that we're playing against. The fact that Dallas have had their own difficult week this week. I don't think we've run into too many teams that have had midweek games, but they have. You know, it's down to us now to try and take advantage of that, to be positive, to stay hopefully in the right mindset, be aggressive, and get what we need out of this game. And like I say, if we can, I think the crowd will certainly continue to be on our side, and the players will feel as though there's much more to fight for.